And welcome into the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. Brett Malamud here with you, along with Zach Malamud. Zach, how are you?
I'm doing all right, Brett. I have a draft tomorrow in Dynasty, my first rookie draft, so I'm really excited. Obviously, really excited to continue on with these division previews as we round out the last two this week.
Yeah, you heard it there. We're going to do 2 episodes this week as we round out our division previews and get right into the nitty-gritty of August, where we hit the Dynasty draft. Recap, I guess we'll say. We'll take a look a little bit at what you did in your 1 quarterback league, and then we will do our super flex as well, and take a look at that redraft or Dynasty rookie and waiver draft that we're having actually this coming weekend. So yeah, a lot on the table, and then obviously redraft content to come as well as we hit the August timeframe where a lot of these leagues are starting to do their drafts. Make sure that you check out some of our other episodes, though, before here. Subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Give us a thumbs up. And, we have been doing a lot of these other divisions. We're hitting our final 2 here as we head west. Zach, I think that, as far as these 2 divisions go, it's going to be pretty competitive. A lot of storylines here. Obviously, San Francisco probably is the spot to begin, and let's start out there. We have obviously the Brock Purdy story, and they ship out Trey Lance. He's basically won the job there. Brock Purdy, no competition. Josh Dobbs, they signed to him as a backup. McCaffrey is there as well. No real addition into the running back room except for Isaac Guriendo later in the draft. And then we have the conundrum going on at wide receiver as they go and they draft Ricky Purcell. Brandon Ayuk requested a trade. Debo potentially on the way down and potentially on the way out after this year, as we hear some rumblings. And then there's George Kittle, who seems to be taking a step back from the top tier George Kittle that we know. Do you think he can repeat? What is his value? Are you selling if you have him in Dynasty? And then what is your just outlook on this receiver room? Because I think there's a lot to dissect here.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing, I'll answer your George Kittle question. I'm probably looking at my options in Dynasty because he is at 30 years old now. And there are a lot of young tight ends, especially Sam Laporta, who just came into the league, and Brock Bowers, who just got drafted by the Raiders. And I mean, there's some other guys there in that top 10 range that are younger players. And George Kittle, that's not to say that his time is done as a top tight end, but I think we're going to end up seeing less of the prime George Kittle that we've been used to the last 5 years or so, or 4 years or so. And his time as a maybe top 3 tight end, maybe top 5 tight end, I don't know if those times are going to come back, Brett. I think a lot of this offense relies on the running game with Christian McCaffrey and some of their other dynamic players out wide in Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. That's not to say George Kittle's not involved, but I think that they're going to look at those younger guys, especially Ricky Purcell, in maybe a year after they figure out this whole situation, whether they choose Ayuk or Deebo to be their number 1 wide. Once they figure that out, I think Purcell is going to come in and just be a dynamic player in this offense. But I will say I'm going to start off at the top with the number 1 player in all of fantasy football, and why not? It's Christian McCaffrey. He is number 1 clearly on my board. He should be the first overall pick in literally every single league in redraft this year, Brett, because there's just nobody on his level. And I think even people are going to say, oh, well, there's going to be a drop from last year to this year for Christian McCaffrey. That drop will still have him close to number 1 in my mind. I mean, that's just how good he is, and the amount of ball he will have in his hands, whether that's receptions or the running game. I mean, he's clearly the number 1 guy in all of fantasy football. I'll then go to the wide receiver room because this is where all the question marks really come from. I'm a believer that Debo's time as a big time NFL player is dwindling down, right? Because I think the injuries are piling up for him. Obviously, we saw that even in the playoffs last year. It just the injuries keep piling up, and with Debo's kind of body, he can only take so much. A lot of his injuries, we're seeing shoulder injuries and arm injuries because he's a running kind of player, and we kind of saw it with Anthony Richardson last year. He had shoulder problems, but the thing about Debo is, yeah, it's kind of getting to the time where he can only take so much more on those shoulders, on his body before it really starts to break down. And I think because of that, I think Brandon Ayuk will end up getting a contract extension this year. I don't know when that will be, but I'm gonna make a prediction there that he's going to be with this team in the future. And I think Debo is just gonna have to settle with a lesser role because of all those injuries piling up. Right now, this year, I think Ayuk is just outside the top 15 because of how many weapons there are in this room. Maybe just right on number 15. I think that's where he ranks in terms of the wide receiver room. Probably a fourth rounder right now. That's where he's being ranked. I basically agree with that. That's just the range for a guy like Ayuk, especially with all the question marks. But he's a very solid wide receiver too, like a very high end wide receiver too. That's where I'd put him. Debo, I'm gonna put lower because the injuries are just piling up year after year. So that's a guy that I will be staying away from this year. I'm just very worried that at some point in the year he's going to go down, and uh, to take a pick in the fourth round and just be so hesitant that he's going to get injured. That will not be me, and that will not be my roster. As for Purcell, I think in rookie drafts he's a solid second round draft pick. In super flex, probably gets into the first round. I would say in one quarterback rookie drafts because the talent is there. I mean, this guy has absolute jump, a lot of bounce, and we kind of see some Debo in his game. So I think the 49ers will really like him, and that's why they drafted him. As for this year, I don't think there's going to be much of an impact because of guys like McCaffrey and maybe Ayuk just taking a lot of those targets. As for Brock Purdy, I'll put him just outside the top 10. I think he's a QB2. I don't, there's some people that put him in the QB1 conversation, and I get that he can get to that level, but I feel like with this offense so reliant on a guy like McCaffrey, and yes, they pass the ball, but I feel like he just takes so much of the touchdown possibility and just everything going on in this offense that I'd feel more comfortable with some of the guys around him, a Jordan Love and maybe Aaron Rodgers. There's just a lot of question marks there. Yes, he has the possibility of a running game with his legs, but I'm not a big believer in it. And finally, George Kittle, like I said, it's a bit of a drop from where we usually see George Kittle. He's outside the top 5 in tight end for me, not too far outside of it. I'd probably put him behind a guy like Dalton Kincaid. I think Kincaid's going to have a huge year, and I'd probably put him at 6 and then maybe Kittle at 7. That's probably where I'd rank him, Brett.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, seeing where Kittle is ranked this year. He's going around like round 8, round 9 range. And yeah, it's a little low, but I think it is one of those potentially really good targets if you are looking at the value that is, there a few rounds earlier when a lot of those top tight ends are going now, because obviously we are in what is being referred to as a tight end renaissance, and a ton of guys at the top of the rankings there that are all sort of going in both the Laportas, McBride, Pitts, even Kincaid, etc. If you want to wait and grab some value at those spots, listen, the fallback on George Kittle is not exactly anything that's a bad thing. And I'd be thrilled to take him at the 8th or 9th round, depending on, how quickly he can go and get scooped up. Obviously, I think that is a good strategy if that is what you're potentially looking at. But as far as Kittle goes, yeah, he's lost a step, but at the same time, I don't know that he totally has, because I still think we're going to see some of those boom weeks, and there might not be as consistent, but that's what you're signing up for. Is that he will get a couple top 5, even top 3 tight end finishes throughout the year. As far as the Debo Ayuk Purcell thing goes, yeah, I mean, I'm a little unsure of what's going to happen as far as whether they trade him now or they let Debo go at the end of the year and they sign Ayuk. Where does Ricky Purcell come into all of this in the equation? I think that today, the pup news that came out, they're going to start Ricky Purcell on the pup list. I think that actually bodes well for the company of that they're going to keep Ayuk for the year. I think, obviously you can't judge that after one day of them showing up at training camp. We'll see, listen, Purcell could be activated tomorrow, and nothing is shocking in this league. The preseason pup and the way that they utilize it, these teams, is really a lot of the time just to get an extra guy in under the roster limit, and allow a guy to work off to the side. So, we'll see what happens exactly with the receiver room. Obviously, the trade request is pretty public now, and, he's made it known he doesn't want to be there. But at the same time, I think that if they came calling with a suitcase full of money, then Brandon Ayuk will reconsider and take the money. That said, the dynasty value right now is an interesting one. I've been talking to the owner in our league, in Dynasty, who has Brandon Ayuk, and where his head's at, potentially can jump into the back edge of the first round, and trade him. Could potentially go out and trade him for known assets. Could potentially go out and just keep him, and say, okay, well, I'm going to start the season with him, and if it doesn't go well, then I'll trade him later. I think that all 3 are viable options. I think that to be able to get Brandon Ayuk for this season is a good thing if you're trying to buy. I think that if I were one of those back half of the first round teams and my Brandon Ayuk owner was out there, shopping, I think that I would, raise my hand and say, hey, I'll give you the 9th or 10th pick. We don't know what a Ladd McConkey will turn out to be. We don't know what, a Keon Coleman will turn out to be. And so, yeah, a known commodity like Brandon Ayuk might be good. That said, I think that there is the potential that if Brandon Ayuk does get traded, that it is to a spot like a New England, to a Washington, where he will be the guy. I also think it might be a little bit harder for him to get, catches and targets, because defenses will adjust a little bit, where they kind of have to watch out for Christian McCaffrey, watch out for George Kittle, watch out for Debo in this offense, a little bit different. And so, yeah, if he got traded to like the New England Patriots, let's say, then yeah, I think we're talking about a little bit of a downgrade as far as the value goes, which is why I understand the Ayuk owner out there who's not panicking, but really just trying to be educated about what they're doing with how they go about keeping his value at the highest and maximizing on a potential return, whether it be now or later. That said, I think if he does stay in San Francisco, it's a great pick in the redraft setting. We're talking about that 3-4 flip right in there on that turn. And so, yeah, while usually that's like a quarterback spot for me, I can understand if somebody was going to wait this year on the quarterbacks a little bit, grab Ayuk there with 1 and grab the quarterback with the 2nd pick. I think that is probably where I would put him. As far as Debo goes, yeah, listen, Zach, you said it. Like, the injuries stuff kind of concerns me a little bit. If I'm a Debo owner, I'm going out there and trying to figure out what's out there. And I think that the one thing that's really speaking to me is this Brandon Ayuk story, because there's a lot of people out there that think Ayuk is definitely going to get traded. And because of that, Debo will definitely be the guy. I think that's so far from the truth, but listen, if you can sell somebody on that and get maximum value, then I think that you got to go try to do it. Like, Debo has not been healthy. It hasn't been amazing when he's been on the field. And to be able to go sell him for pretty much that back half of the first round value that I was just talking about. Like, I think that that's where his value is right now. I would do that. I think that I would go out and trade Debo, grab the 10th pick, 11th pick of the first round, and just basically go out and take your lottery ticket of your whoever it is, whether it's McConkey. Like in our draft, we're talking about the potential that, the tight end room might potentially jump, and Brock Bowers might be sitting there at one of those spots, just based on that everybody sort of has a tight end. So yeah, I think it's kind of interesting, but for me, I think that now is the time to sell high on Debo. I'm not going to be the one taking him in the 5th round in Dynasty or in redraft. Sorry. I'd much rather have some of those other talents that are there, Cooper Kupps, Malik Neighbors is right there, who's going to be a target monster. DJ Moore, who I think even with the competition still is going to get a ton of work. Even like guys like Mark Andrews and Trey McBride, like those top tight ends that we talked, like I'd probably want them over a Deebo Samuel just because I think there's even less risk as far as that goes. Listen, I don't really have to talk much about Christian McCaffrey. He's going to be the number 1 pick in pretty much every league. I've seen him go number 2 in a bunch of leagues too, that I've been mocking in, and that's an interesting case. And it just really comes down to, do you want CeeDee Lamb over him? Like, that's the one guy I've seen picked in the first spot. And it really just comes down to your preference of how you see your draft going, how you see your team being built. And so, yeah, I won't fault anybody for taking CeeDee Lamb over Christian McCaffrey if you think that you can get some good running backs on the back half and you think that you're not going to get that sort of a machine. But for me, if I had the first pick, I'm taking Christian McCaffrey. I'll just be honest. I have the 2nd pick in our draft, Zach, in redraft in a month from now. I don't think I'll be getting Christian McCaffrey. I think I'll be getting CeeDee Lamb at that spot. But at the same time, like, a guy can wish, right? So I think that any Christian McCaffrey owner, and we've been saying this for however long Christian McCaffrey's been in the league, like, you have to go out and you have to get Elijah Mitchell, because I think that protecting yourself is sort of the name of the game when you're a Christian McCaffrey owner. Jordan Mason is a potential guy that might get a little bit more work this year, and he looked pretty good. Garendo, I think that, we'll see. I think that they were a little intrigued by him, and maybe something to come later on. I don't know that he's going to get it right away, but I do think that they will carry all 4 of those guys on their roster. And there's the potential that they cut Jordan Mason and just give the job to the rookie right away as the 3rd running back. So we'll see what happens. But I think that as far as the redraft standpoint goes, wait and see what the roster move looks like. A lot of people have their redrafts right after cut day, and that's sort of right before Labor Day, right before the season. And so see who that backup is, and then go out and grab him with your second to last or last pick, because they should both be there, or all 3 of those guys should be there right towards the end of your draft. And then Brock Purdy, I think that, you sort of nailed it on the head where you said it, he's a quarterback too. I agree. I think that for me, everybody's sort of just overhyping Brock Purdy. And it really just comes to that. It comes down to the team. They're on national TV all the time. Great story, took it by storm, beat out Trey Lance for the job. And listen, he was a good quarterback. Like, he was a very good quarterback. That said, I think that there's a few options for me in this. I think that if you are one of those teams who likes to have 2 quarterbacks and 2 solid quarterbacks on your redraft team, Brock Purdy's a really good guy to go get as your second quarterback, like really solid. And so that's a guy that I'd be targeting around the 10th, 11th round, I'd say, when you're trying to get those backups and fill those roles there. As far as the dynasty value goes, I think it's a little more interesting because I think we're sort of at a weird time for San Francisco, and there's a lot of uncertainty of what the future holds. And Brock Purdy's value is still super sky high. And so I think that the value right now of where those picks are, you could probably get yourself whatever, like a mid first rounder. Something to consider. I think that it's really coming down to where's your team at. If you're one of those teams that is rebuilding, I think you can get a haul for a guy like a Brock Purdy. That said, if you're a contender, like I'm holding on to him, especially in Superflex, where you could potentially go get a guy who is your number one and then have Purdy there staying as your number two. But as far as, the rebuilders, I think that it's a time, especially in Superflex, where, obviously we know how quarterbacks are gold. I think that you could probably get a really solid value. So even if, Purdy doesn't do as well this year as far as the points go, like you can still cash in on that.
Yeah, completely, Brett. Just quickly, the last thing on this, because I kind of want to give the viewers and listeners like a bit of a visual of where we're talking about Brock Purdy in terms of redraft. Like he's on the brink right now of a quarterback one into a quarterback two. I'm looking at a guy like a Kirk Cousins, I'll use as an example, because people have put him as a clear quarterback two. He's a backup and put him down. So you kind of take both sides of it. Brock Purdy has a great running back, Christian McCaffrey. Kirk Cousins has a great running back, Bijan Robinson. However, Brock Purdy has the rushing upside, whereas Kirk Cousins barely has any of that. And then there's a guy like Kirk Cousins who has the throwing ability and will get way more fantasy points in the air with his arm rather than Brock Purdy. So it's kind of like you pick and choose between two guys like that. And personally, I would take a guy like Kirk Cousins over Brock Purdy in that situation, even though they're ranked like a little lower than each other. I would say I'd feel more comfortable with a guy like Cousins because I know what he'll give me with his arm, even though there's the upside when it comes to rushing for Brock Purdy.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, listen, we're not trying to dump on Purdy. I just think like people's expectations of this guy are like he's going to be this top 5 quarterback, and he's just not. He's not. He has the rushing ability, but it's not to the extent that some of these other guys have. And I think that some of those guys in that next tier are, higher value. Even a guy like a Jordan Love who might be ranked right around there, I still would have Jordan Love on my team, I think, over Brock Purdy. And so, I think that it's sort of that top backup. If you have Brock Purdy as your starter, you're not going to be bad because it means that you've filled out your roster with some pretty talented guys, I would assume, before you got Purdy. But I think Purdy falling a bit in drafts is good for if you want to have a really, really solid backup. And obviously Superflex, like same thing I said, second option for me. And same with the Dynasty, like great second option.
100%.
All right, so let's jump out to LA, where Zach, I think that it's sort of still a little bit murky this year as far as what the situation is, and what I mean by that is we still have Matt Stafford. He's there. They bring in Jimmy Garoppolo to be his backup, who will serve a few game suspension. Stetson Bennett hopefully is going to be coming back after sitting out a year for personal reasons. And Matt Stafford took a little bit of a step back last year and got hurt. And, we saw him banged up. We're starting to see the back half of Matt Stafford's career. Will this be the final years? The question that we've been hearing the last couple of years. And obviously that'll still continue. They go out, they draft Blake Corum to sit behind Kyren Williams. Big question mark there is, will Kyren Williams have this huge workload like was envisioned, or are they going to go to Blake Corum, who they claim is a Kyren Williams clone? And then, of course, we have wide receiver. Puka Nacua Show obviously dominated the headlines last year as he just basically set the league on fire. Now he comes back, and obviously they have Cooper Kupp there as well, DeMarcus Robinson, Tutu Atwell. And then they have Tyler Higbee, who's back there again as the tight end. So let's break it down. I don't know where you want to start on these guys here.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the guy that is our cover today. He's also on my Dynasty team. I'm expecting a big year for him. I'll start with Kyren Williams, the running back for the Los Angeles Rams. And why not? I mean, a fantastic year last year where it basically we had question marks of, okay, well, Cam Akers is there early, and there's some other guys there early. Is it going to be a committee? And Sean McVay's offense completely shut that down. They said, okay, Kyren Williams is completely our guy, 100%. Nobody's coming even close to him. And now he heads into this year as running back 6 being taken in draft. So, I mean, that just kind of tells you what fantasy experts and what people are thinking again for this guy this year, because yes, they drafted Blake Corum, but I feel like in Corum's case, it's more of a goal line type of player where they are going to use him, no doubt. I would say he's going to get some touchdowns right on the goal line. He's also going to get some fourth down plays, maybe the short yardage fourth down where you just jam it into the offensive line like he did so many times all those years at Michigan. I think that's more of Blake Corum's role this year because of the injuries that kind of were a little bit there. They tried to protect Kyren Williams in this offense a fair amount towards the end of the season, Brett. And I feel like because of that, the injury risk that may be there, Blake Corum will take those harder hits inside the tackles because that's what he's built like. He's built like a bulldozer that just runs through everybody. And I think it's a great draft pick for the Rams. As for Blake Corum, I don't think the value's too high this year. However, I definitely, if you are a Kyren Williams owner, I'm grabbing Blake Corum easily as a handcuff because I think Kyren Williams as a RB1. Now you look at Blake Corum, he could also be an RB1 in the right situation. I know everybody has their question marks about the height, and he had a great offensive line all those years. This guy is a freak. He's a really, really talented football player, and I think he'll be solid in this offense if Williams, for some reason, goes down. Like, Blake Corum is clearly the next guy up. I would definitely draft him as a handcuff. We talk every year about how important those handcuffs are, and Blake Corum might be near the top of those handcuffs, a guy to grab, just based on how much work Kyren Williams really gets in this offense. Next to the wide receivers, I think Puka Nacua, the rankings speak for themselves. He's inside the top 10. He's right now 7 in PPR. That's a great spot for him. He's definitely right in there next to guys like Garrett Wilson, A.J. Brown, Chris Olave. You can kind of put him wherever you want there, but he is there because he's getting those targets from Matthew Stafford. A very, very solid wide receiver 1, and he could do great things once again this year. The guy right behind him, Cooper Kupp, that's a question that comes about because it's hard to rank a guy like Cooper Kupp because of the injury risk that he's had in the last couple of years. That even last year, that's why Puka Nacua became Puka Nacua. It was because of Cooper Kupp's injuries, and it just gave Nacua all of those snaps and more opportunities in this offense that he built that relationship with Stafford, the same that Kupp did the year before. So, looking at Kupp, I definitely put him in the top 25, but there's just such a large amount of wide receivers this year. You're probably going to put him just early 20s. I would probably put him next to guys like Devonta Smith, maybe a Jalen Waddle, the number 2 behind a big powerhouse number 1 wide receiver. I think that's just the range for him. And those guys have kind of set the benchmark, Smith and Waddle have, of, yeah, all right, they're going to be in the top 25. Yes, they can get a little bit higher than that, but for early rankings, that's where you're probably placing Cooper Kupp. And I don't think it's a bad draft pick because I think this offense is going to throw the ball. So I definitely think Cooper Kupp can have a really solid year, even if Nacua is the top weapon and inside the top 10 for wide receivers. The last guy I'm going to put an eye on is DeMarcus Robinson, Brett, because last year, I think he had a touchdown in like 5 straight games or 5 out of 6 or whatever it was. He was unstoppable from weeks 13 to 18. Just unbelievable. And I think because they are such a pass-heavy offense, this is a guy who can be like a Tyler Boyd type of player where He's not going to get the targets of Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, but he's going to get enough that if one of those guys goes down, then he is a easy wide receiver 2 in your lineup or a flex play that you're saying, yeah, all right, this is perfect. I think Demarcus Robinson, a guy to grab really on your bench right now for this year, is a really solid player. Brett, he's ranked 73rd in PPR amongst wide receivers. I mean, he's a really solid player. He proved it last year in the last 5 weeks of the season that he can be a really strong fantasy target in this offense. Next to tight end, I would not put Higbee really too close to this fantasy radar here. Maybe he's a backup and you kind of look at a matchup, but there's a question that if Colby Parkinson can take a lot of those targets as well from Higbee. So I really wouldn't put him on the radar too much, maybe just a streaming option 1 or 2 weeks throughout the year. And then finally, Matthew Stafford, a really solid super flex option because of this pass heavy offense. I'd probably put him as a QB2, just like probably on the border of the 20s, I would say in redraft. He's a QB2 and a guy that if he stays healthy, he could be a really solid fantasy quarterback this year. There's just so many guys at quarterback, Brett, that a guy like Matthew Stafford, who can be consistent, is just way down in terms of redraft this year.
Yeah, I just think that, the ability to use your legs has really started to separate a lot of these guys. And Matt Stafford doesn't do that. It's really just dump offs and obviously picking out guys like Puka and Cooper Kupp and Demarcus Robinson down the field. So for me, he's probably a low end as far as the quarterback twos go. Sort of on his last leg. I think that, if you have him in Dynasty, you're kind of just letting him ride into the sunset on your team. You're not really selling him because it really doesn't have much value. As far as Higbee goes, I think that, it is sort of off the radar for me as well. He battled a torn ACL at the end of the year last year. So now he's sort of coming back from that. There's talk that he might open the season on PUP. They're not sure yet. So obviously stay tuned to reports on that. But for me, he's not a consideration in the draft. Puka Nacua, though, is. And, I obviously fell into a situation where he fell into my lap and he was out there on waivers after our rookie draft, grabbed him. And obviously now he's one of my top receivers. And so as far as the dynasty value that goes, I'm a little nervous. I'm not going to lie, because I think that the expectation of him going as a top 5 receiver, and it was sort of not a fluke, but there were times where it felt like, okay, is this really going to continue? And then it did. So I don't know. I think that obviously he's a very talented receiver. His profile didn't exactly match a guy that was going to hit those numbers. And so he sort of exceeded his expectations, which is why he fell where he fell in the draft. But listen, I think that if they play the offense and the style that they've played the last couple of years, where it's, pick out that guy, and they did it with Cooper Kupp for so many years, and now it's Puka. If Puka is that guy, then yeah, he's right there in the second round of redraft for me, and he'll for sure be a top 10 wide receiver. Cooper Kupp's an interesting case, though, because if that is the case, I don't know how Cooper Kupp survives as, one of those top 20 wide receivers. I think that, the guys that I mentioned, like right around that range, Debo and DK Metcalf, Neighbors, like I'd probably put them over Cooper Kupp. I don't know. I'm a little unsure about it. And so just because I see it as a downgraded year, I also see a guy like Demarcus Robinson having an upgrade from what he had. And so it's a guy to potentially go out and get at the end of your draft. Not saying he's going to get Cooper Kupp-like numbers, but I think he'll be a thorn in the side of Cooper Kupp, which is why I downgraded Cooper a little bit. Tutu Atwell, another guy who's had a lot of the boom-bust kind of weeks, sort of like that Gabe Davis role where you'll get a lot of those long bombs and then you'll say, oh, hey, is he an option? No, he's probably not an option. Let somebody else take him and use the roster spot on him. That's sort of my outlook. When we saw it last year, everybody rushed to the waiver wire to get it. People who have fab spent most of their fab to go get Tutu Atwell. Turned out to not be anything. They thought that it was going to be Puka Nacua and Tutu Atwell running this whole offense. It wasn't. And quickly that was realized. And so he's off the radar for me. As far as Kyren Williams goes, listen, I agree with you, Zach, that he is going to be a monster this year. I also agree with you that if you have him, go get Blake Corum, because I think that if they do use Kyren Williams in this workhorse back role, then the risk for injury goes up that much more. And if they do that, I think that Blake Corum, being the clone that he is of Kyren Williams, as they said, like they're a very similar style runner, Blake Corum will be a workhorse back. I don't see them going to Ronnie Rivers. I don't see them going to Zach Evans, etc. I don't think they're going to bring anyone off the street. They signed Boston Scott. I don't think he has a role at all. This is going to be a two-headed monster. Like you said, you might see some touchdown vultures coming out of Blake Corum as he punches him from the 5-yard line and inside. But to me, I think that both of these guys have a role, and both of these guys deserve to be drafted. And so, I think that Corum's value is a little more interesting because you're looking at like the round 9, round 10 range where you're seeing some of these rookies start to come off as well, right around there. The Odunzes, Coleman, Benson, like I'd be thrilled to have Blake Corum in there if you can get him at that spot. And obviously if you're in and you have Kyren Williams early in the draft, then you might have to jump up a round to get him, because I think that the name Blake Corum sort of was around the world in the last year as far as the hot item. And so I think that a lot of fantasy players are going to be out there trying to go get a guy like a Blake Corum. I also see his dynasty value skyrocketing just based on his name. And so, I honestly am thinking, Zach, like he's probably going to go the very top of our second round in our dynasty rookie draft. I think he's going to be right there, one of those first names in the second round. I wouldn't be shocked at all if he even slipped into the back half of the first round. And really, it just comes down to what is your league setup. You'll tell us after you do your one quarterback league. I think that obviously his value goes a little bit higher in that standpoint, where you're talking about him being a legitimate first round talent and should go in the back half of the first round. I think that you'll see that in a lot of rookie drafts. But yeah, it should be kind of interesting for me. And, I asked you this question off stream, and I'm going to ask you it here again. What do you see as a Kyren owner, maybe not for your team, but more general? Do you see this as a potential sell high window as a Kyren owner? And, if your team is right on the cusp of the playoffs, it seems, if your team, it doesn't work out, like, is trading Kyren for King's ransom a potential option for you?
Yeah, of course. And I responded in my certain case, I only have Bijan and Kyren, who I would consider as like the two good running backs on my team. After that, it's really not much. So because of that, then it's singling it down to one running back, and that would be difficult. But if somebody has Kyren and they start off the season very slow, and that's a guy that you can trade for a whole lot and get a haul for him, because there's just such a big name there in fantasy football right now because of that production. And it's not to say that it's going to just all of a sudden stop at some point in the next couple of years. However, if he is a workhorse back, can he handle it? And the question marks continue to be raised there. And that's something that I'm worried about as a Kyren owner, is if he is a workhorse, can he withstand himself from injuries? That's a big thing in my mind. So, or will they do a lot more to protect him is another part of that. And I think if you are a Kyren owner and you're towards the bottom right now of your league, this is a perfect opportunity to sell him. You get a probably mid to high first rounder right now. He's in the top 10, almost in the top 5 of running backs. That's a guy that you can definitely get a mid to high first rounder for, just based on he's exactly what a team would want, a contender would want to add to their running back room. So yes, he is in a sell high window.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that really obviously it comes down to what your team is, what your situation is. Like you, who's a team on the cusp of the playoffs, like you said, not a lot of depth. And obviously that's where you want to sort of hold him at least till midway into the season. If it starts to go off the rails a little bit, then it's a potential guy you can go out, trade for one of those 2025 picks and, potentially some good players as well with them. And what should be next year. And I can't believe we're already starting to talk about next year's draft class because it feels like this year they haven't even taken the field yet. But next year seems to be pretty stacked. Before we get over to the Seattle Seahawks, just a quick update here. The Patriots are going to start Antonio Gibson on the NFI list. Kendrick Bourne and Cole Strange are going to the PUP list. So just a little minor thing there. But listen, it is an interesting case with Ramondre, and we talked about him a few weeks ago. And will he be a workhorse? Will he get some passing game options? And, obviously they bring in Antonio Gibson, so we'll see what happens there. Let's jump over to the Seattle Seahawks. As they go out, they bring Mike McDonald in to be the new head coach. Zach, this is a group that pretty much returns everybody from what they had last year. They have Geno Smith. They bring in Sam Howell to be the backup. They bring PJ Walker in to be the third stringer. Charbonnet and Walker still the two-headed monster there. We'll see what changes. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. And then obviously they bring back Lockett, Metcalf, and Jackson Smith and Jigba with Noah Fant as the tight end. Jake Bobo as well. They bring in Laviska Shenault to be in that receiver room as well. Zach, where do you want to start here?
I'm going to start at the wide receivers, Brett. I think I talked about this team last week and at the end of our show to preview this one. And Seattle is just one of those teams that they just don't get love. They're not getting any love. All the noise is, oh, Marvin's in the division now. Oh, the Ayuk situation. Oh, well, Puka Nacua is a real star. The Seattle Seahawks, Brett, were 9-8 last year. 9-8 with Geno Smith leading the way at quarterback. The only thing they lost was Pete Carroll as their head coach, and now they have Mike McDonald to come in. This team is ready to go. I think their defense is probably their weakest part because all of their offense and their fantasy offense here is just unbelievable. So I'll start at the wide receiver room. DK Metcalf I put him in the top 15. A lot of people have him on the border. But I think he's a really, really solid option as a probably, I would say, high-end wide receiver 2 with upside of a wide receiver 1. I wouldn't put him in the wide receiver 1 range because of how many weapons they do have in this offense. But another solid year coming for DK as long as he stays healthy. The next guy, it's not Tyler Lockett in my mind. It's Jackson Smith and Jigba. Even though people kind of go back and forth between the two, I think this is the year 2 step up from JSN, where it wasn't that exciting in his rookie year, and we didn't really expect it, Brett, you and I. We said, okay, well, he's going to be, okay, meh, probably the third option. They'll probably give Lockett more targets. And look what happened. Tyler Lockett got more targets, and JSN had a pretty bad year for the standards of a guy who went in the first round. However, now he's got some time in this offense, and I think he's the clear number 2 coming into this season because of his ability to be quicker and possession kind of wide receiver as well. He could do a bit of everything. And I think Lockett's cliff of a wide receiver 2 and in fantasy and just a solid wide receiver 2 in the league is dwindling down. And I think JSN is going to take over as the number 2 in this offense. I wouldn't put Lockett too much further down, but it's not a guy that I'm going out to get. If he falls in my lap and he's sitting on my bench, I'm like, all right, yeah, I could take a shot on him 1 week. Maybe one of those guys goes down and Lockett gets the opportunity. But I don't think it's going to be the same kind of year that we've been used to of Tyler Lockett. And Jake Bobo, he's on the Dynasty radar. I don't know if he's anywhere close to a redraft radar. Just a guy to keep an eye on in that wide receiver room as Lockett gets up there in age. Maybe he could become the 3 if once Lockett is out the door. The next at running back is another room where I think these guys are just continually getting doubted. And Kenneth Walker, the third, Brett, was one of the top running backs in terms of touchdowns last year and just being able to break through tackles. And he is outside the top 15 in fantasy rankings. And it's hard because there's not many guys that you'd say, all right, yeah, I'd throw him over him. But this is a guy that I'm keeping an eye on because if he's going as running back 16 and I get him as my RB2, I'm going to throw a party, Brett. I think this guy is just perfect in every way as a fantasy running back. And yes, Zach Charbonnet right behind him can get an increase, but I think it's Kenneth Walker's room. And everything's going to run through Kenneth Walker. And especially that will come on the ground and in the run game where he had a ton of touchdowns. So I think that's a big thing for Walker this year. I put him as a running back too because there's not much to put him over there because of how many guys there are. But that's a real solid option as an RB2 in my mind. Geno is not on the radar in terms of redraft. I think he's in the lower 20s just because the rushing ability is not the same as some of those other quarterbacks. And the passing game is not as high to put him in that top 15 range with some of those other elite passers. Just quickly back on Charbonnet, Brett, I'll put him. He's, of course, if you're getting Kenneth Walker, you may try and get Charbonnet. Some guys may grab him a little bit earlier, but if you can definitely get him, I would 100% go grab him as a handcuff. I think he's going to go a little bit earlier than some of those guys, though. Even though he may be ranked a little lower, I think the name of Charbonnet as a pass catcher, especially, and that running back too, can definitely catch people's eyes heading into this season. But if you have Kenneth Walker, then go get Zach Charbonnet, definitely, even if you have to reach a little bit to go get him. And finally, at tight end, I would not put Noah Fant really on the radar. I just think there's too many tight ends, tight end 1s, tight end 2s that you can go look at. Maybe he's a streaming option if they have a good week or so, but or a good matchup or so. But I think with how many weapons there are in this offense, it's just hard to find a real role for Noah Fant.
Yeah, like you said, I agree. I think that Noah Fant's definitely off the radar for me. As far as it goes with the receiver room, like you said, same thing. Like DK is being slept on right now. I think that it's pretty easy to target him as a 3-4 turn kind of a guy. And so, yes, obviously, like they're being slept on, and he's the number one guy. I agree with you. I think that Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to be ranked ahead of Tyler Lockett. Listen, the value is sort of close for me, but at the same time, like I'd rather have Smith and Jigba, I think, this year, because I think that this is going to be new staff, and they're going to look at the talent. They're not going to play favorites on their guys. They're going to really push him to take the step forward. It is a potential buy low window, and I say buy low in quotations because I don't think his value really dipped a ton in Dynasty. But there are some who are a little more impatient in the Dynasty community on him, and so yeah, he's potentially a guy you can go out and get for lower than what he obviously went last year, about the mid-round first. We're probably talking a lower round first, potentially a second and a guy sort of range. As far as Geno goes, like super flex option for me, nothing more than that. Really lower end guy now, and it sort of has tailed off. But as far as the running back room goes, I agree with you. I think that, if you grab one, you have to grab the other, sort of a thing. I did that last year, and I was thrilled in the week that obviously I was a little scared when Kenneth Walker got hurt. But obviously there was Charbonnet there sitting on my bench. And so it was that little bit of exhale and, it's okay. We still have the guy. And Charbonnet, listen, he impressed a little bit. It was sort of hit and miss for a couple weeks there. And I have him on my Dynasty team as well. And so, yeah, it was a guy that I honestly considered like flipping this offseason, as I am a contender and potentially can go make a move. And you have to obviously give up some young pieces to rebuilders. And so it did come into consideration, ended up not flipping him. He's still there. Looking forward to him hopefully getting a little bit more of a chunk than he did last year. That said, this is still Kenneth Walker's backfield. And I think that, the redraft community especially is sleeping on him, and they kind of pushed him even further down than they did with DK. And so we're talking about like a 5th round talent, or I should say a 1st or 2nd round talent going in the 5th round. So for me, I think that Walker's another guy to kind of keep your eye on from redraft. And, I just think like this is a guy that in the Dynasty community, especially, is a guy that you could potentially go out and try to make a move on, because I think the value is sort of depreciated in the running back market, where there's the very top of the top where you got your Bijans, your Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs, McCaffrey, even Jonathan Taylor, and that's sort of it. And then the value sort of dips a little bit to the Saquons, Etienne, Kenneth Walker, etc. I think that sort of is an opportunity if you are a contender to go out and trade for a guy, and it might not cost that much, just based on the fact that the entire position seems to be a little bit more replaceable than it was in years past.
Yeah, completely, Brett. And this guy is somebody I'm definitely keeping an eye on. He'll be in my queue when I'm doing drafts. Like, he is ranked way lower than I actually expected. I will be all over Kenneth Walker the third, especially in the 3rd or 4th round if I can get him.
All right, so jumping to our last team here, Zach, this to me is maybe the most intriguing team outside of the Indianapolis Colts, I think. Just based on we're not really sure exactly how everything's going to go and line up. A lot of young, intriguing pieces here on the Arizona Cardinals. Obviously, Kyler Murray is back. Kyler Murray is healthy, knock on wood, heading into this season. They bring back James Conner, draft Trey Benson, who seems to be the heir to the throne, at least if you ask the Dynasty community. Michael Carter is still there. Amari DiMercato is still there. They go out in the receiver room and they upgrade big time. They let go of Hollywood Brown, bring in Marvin Harrison Jr. to be the number 1 guy. They also go out and they bring in Zay Jones. Greg Dortch is there. Michael Wilson is there. And then, of course, Trey McBride, with the end of the season that he had last year. It was unbelievable watching that, especially as an owner of him in Dynasty. And then they go out and they draft Tip Ryman as well. Zach, let's start out with the big story. Marvin Harrison. How do you think, A, where should he go in these drafts? And B, how do you think he will affect Kyler's value?
So it's hard because, Brett, we talk about rookies and we say, all right, well, it's difficult to rank them because we just don't know. And maybe they're going into an offense that we don't think too highly about. This is a kind of year, though, where you say, all right, well, both guys, Harrison, Neighbors, and Odunze on a level below that, you say, well, they're clearly the number 1 and they're going to get the ball. Like, they're the number 1 option clearly in their offense, and it's frankly not even close. So for that reason, then you push a guy like Harrison up. I'd put him in the top 15. I don't know if I'd feel insanely comfortable if he was my wide receiver 1, Brett. I think I would say maybe if you get him as your wide receiver 2 and you take 2 receivers in the first couple of rounds, then you say, all right, yeah, I'd feel more comfortable with that. But because he's a rookie and I just don't know, there's so many proven guys around him. I mean, he's getting ranked right next to Michael Pittman and Mike Evans, who I'd both clearly take over him. I think for that reason, I'd say if you can get him as your second wide, then clearly go ahead and take him. But as a wide receiver one, I'm just a little iffy this year. He's clearly in Dynasty, though, the number one pick if you need a wide receiver. If you don't need a quarterback, especially, that's the big thing. If you don't need a quarterback, then you're taking Marvin Harrison. And if you do need a quarterback, then you probably are going to take one of them before you take the wide receiver and Harrison. I mean, this guy's all world. We talked about it after the draft. This guy's just going to be unbelievable. But with so much hype comes a little bit of expectations being so high, and it could lead to a little downfall. But I think this guy can break through all of that and definitely live up to all the hype that he's received in his college career and now into his NFL career. He's in the top 15, and like I said, looking for him as a wide receiver too. Definitely, I would go after him. The rest of the wide receiver room is a little bit murky in my mind, just because there's a lot of names there, and Zay Jones is probably the top name that you look at and say, oh well, he's a proven NFL pro. But Michael Wilson can also get targets. Greg Dortch can also get targets. I just don't really feel too comfortable with any of these guys. I would say if you pick one of them, you're probably putting them on your bench and you get them in one of the later rounds. I think Harrison and the gap between him and just the rest of the guys is so big that I don't feel as comfortable with one of those guys. And a big reason for that is also his tight end in Trey McBride, who in my mind is clearly the number 2 option in this offense. And that's why it pushes the wide receivers so far down. Trey McBride is a top 5 tight end, no doubt about it, because of the amount of targets he got from Kyler Murray last year. And then as Kyler was getting back from injury, like Trey McBride is one of the best tight ends in the league. And he should be drafted in the top 5 among tight ends. I think he's right next to Evan Ingram inside that top 5. That's a perfect spot for him because he's going to get the targets in this offense as the number 2 weapon for the Cardinals this season. As for the running backs, James Conner is still the guy. I've seen a lot of hype for Trey Benson, and believe me, I'm all in on it for next year. I think Trey Benson will completely take over after a year learning behind James Conner. But for right now, James Conner is the guy in my mind, and he's a top 25 running back. You're looking at maybe getting him in the 7th or 8th round, Brett. That's great value. I mean, that's a running back 2 upside kind of player who you're getting pretty late. Like that's a really solid player to get. I think he can have the same impact that he's had all of those years in Arizona. The question obviously comes with, oh, well, he has Kyler as his quarterback and the running ability of Kyler. I don't know if it's the same, Brett. The injuries worried me a little bit in terms of Kyler's running game and the stats popping off the charts like they had in the past. I still think they're going to be up there, but I don't know if they'll be as high as we've seen because I think he won't take as many risks in terms of his legs and everything going on in terms of those injuries. Plus, he has so many weapons to go to now. But I would put Benson as a handcuff for Conner. That's another guy to look at as a handcuff this year. But I do think if Conner's healthy, it's clearly his backfield. Benson is a second rounder in dynasty drafts now that some people are looking at of even taking earlier because they need running back. So I don't blame them. I think this guy's going to be unbelievable in the next couple of years, just not this year. I think he needs a little time to learn. And finally, Kyler is a top 10 quarterback this year. The legs, I said I'm worried about it a little bit, but I still put him in the top 10 because he has all of those weapons. He has a great offense to work with. And when he is on the field, Kyler Murray is a really, really strong fantasy quarterback. So definitely a guy to look at. If you're not looking at those top guys, he's on that bottom part of the QB1s, and a guy that you'd be comfortable with still as your number one quarterback this year.
Yeah, I agree. I think I agree with pretty much everything that you said. The interesting one for me with this team has to do with the running back room. I think that if you are one of those teams, like you said, that's going to go out and get James Conner, probably in that round 7 range, I do agree with grabbing Trey Benson just a few rounds later, in about the 9 or 10 round range. And so you're grabbing 2 running backs on the same team, a couple rounds apart. So there's a lot of people that are going to be a little turned off by that, and I understand it. But, obviously, James Conner is going to be the guy from the get-go. So if you're looking at this room and you're intrigued by it, like, you have to grab James Conner, not just Trey Benson. Obviously, as the season goes on, I think we see more of a workload building for Benson, especially in the passing game, where James Conner hasn't really shined. And as far as Kyler goes, yeah, he's a top 10 guy for me. It's one of those guys where if you're waiting on the quarterback, grabbing the talent and the value as it comes to you, like, Kyler is a perfect guy to get in the 8th round, right around that Joe Burrow range, and he has the rushing ability, which I think is an important thing. Like you said, the injury is a little concerning, and so I think it's a little more of a conservative play, which is why I'd probably drop him a little bit further down, and why the guys that are in the top 6 or 7 guys are there, and Kyler's not one of them, has to do with the rushing ability. But yeah, I think that he's still a top 10 option, and he should get a lot of points. Marvin Harrison's an interesting case, obviously, like top of the super flex drafts, even ahead of Caleb Williams, and rightfully so. I think this is going to be a big target monster. I agree with you when you said that there's nobody else in that room that really is intriguing. I agree. I think that I would not want to draft any of those guys other than Marvin Harrison. That said, Marvin Harrison's probably like a back half of the 2nd round, I would say, in a lot of these drafts. And as somebody who picks 2nd in our draft, like that back half for the 2nd round, like it's a very intriguing option to pick there in the 2 to 3 turn, Marvin Harrison, or risk, obviously, him getting taken at that turn. But yeah, that'll be an option for another day. As far as Trey McBride goes, listen, I absolutely love this guy. I do. He basically has cemented himself as my top tight end, and I have no intention of him going anywhere for a while. And I think that he's going to end up being one of those target monsters. And it really just comes down to, they don't have anybody too great that's in the receiver room. So they're going to have to throw to somebody. Somebody's going to double team or triple team Marvin. Not that he can't do it, because we saw what he did in college when he was double and triple teamed. But I just think, to get Trey McBride, he's a top 5 tight end. We saw the catches, and especially in PPR leagues, what that means from the tight end standpoint. He's a very good consideration for me in the 4th or 5th round. I'd rank him ahead of some of these other tight ends that I'm seeing there. Mark Andrews, I'd probably put him ahead of Mark Andrews. Dalton Kincaid, I'd probably put him ahead of Dalton Kincaid as well. Evan Ingram, Kyle Pitts, probably ahead of all those guys. And so, to me, yeah, I think that 4 to 5 round is probably his spot. And yeah, just kind of looking forward to hopefully him growing into this bigger role. I just briefly want to talk about Trey Benson and Dynasty, because I think that the community sort of has pushed him to this top of the 2nd round, sort of where you're seeing a guy like a Blake Corum get picked. Listen, I see it. I understand what people are thinking and doing. I think that we really need to be patient, though. I think that James Conner is going to be the guy, at least for this year. I agree with you when you said, like, this is a next year play. Listen, James Conner could be really good this year, and then they sign him to a minimum money deal, and he stays again. I think that that's sort of the fear that comes to mind when it comes to drafting a guy like a Trey Benson. We saw it in a place like Detroit, where you have that ground and pound guy, and what a Montgomery can do to a Gibbs and that value. We saw it early on. A lot of Gibbs owners were up in arms. Oh my God, he's never going to be the same. They were shipping him off literally just a few games into his rookie year. If you drafted Trey Benson in the second round, like, be patient. That's the only thing I can say is be patient. James Conner will drive you crazy. James Conner drove a whole bunch of Pittsburgh Steelers fans crazy for years because he was really good, and then all of a sudden he fell off a cliff. And so, listen, we don't know if that cliff's going to come, but I can tell you point blank, like, as far as James Conner's fantasy value now in the last few years, he finished in fantasy points per game in his last 3 seasons as fantasy running back number 7, number 9, and number 13. And so I just think, like, there's the potential that he has another really good year. He's an RB2 or RB3 range, and we'll see what happens. But the way that the running back market sort of is depreciated as far as the contracts go, like, it's a guy who they might not have to pay a ton of money to next year. And so I'd be a little more cautious than people are being on Trey Benson, going out, trading up for him. Like, I'm seeing all these sorts of things. I'm just sort of tempering my expectations there.
100% agree, Brett.
All right, so just quickly before we wrap up our show, I want to go revisit the Minnesota Vikings as they give Christian Darrisaw a 4-year, $113 million deal. They also came out this week and said that it's no real timetable for J.J. McCarthy to become the starter. And so, yes, a little bit more protection there, but also as far as the J.J. hype train goes, a little bit of a downgrade. Zach, where do you see him going in these rookie drafts, especially knowing that he might not be the starter right away? And if he does become the starter, he's not going to have a guy like a TJ Hawkinson, most likely.
Yeah, I mean, Brett, I'm somebody that actually traded out because I wasn't able. I did not believe I was going to get one of those top quarterbacks. And after Caleb and Jaden Daniels go off the board, there's no starters right there. I mean, you have the question mark of maybe is Bo Nix, but he's clearly not on the level of those other guys, a McCarthy, a Drake May, who are going much higher than him in a first round. I would say JJ's probably in the mid first round, and that's a solid place for Superflex. I do think this dropped him a huge chunk in one quarterback leagues because there's just so much more focus on guys that are going to play right away. And whether that's receivers or running backs that are just hanging around in those rookie drafts, like there's a lot more value in those guys than a guy like JJ McCarthy that you're going to have to wait on. I have my separate feelings on JJ McCarthy. I think just because of a player who I in my mind is a second round talent, but obviously with how this draft shaked out and all these teams really going for quarterbacks, he ended up being a first rounder, an early first rounder. So we'll see how it goes, but I did expect this to happen where they have Sam Darnold, and why not really allow JJ McCarthy to learn behind a NFL vet in Sam Darnold, who's going to run this offense very well and use all of the weapons that he has right next to him, the Aaron Jones and Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson. All of those guys, like they are going to do well with Sam Darnold at quarterback. And I do think it's just going to take some time for McCarthy to really settle in as an NFL quarterback.
Yeah, I agree. I just think, like, obviously you traded out and you traded with me. And so I traded into the pick. My team's in a little bit of a different spot. Pat Mahomes and Anthony Richardson are my quarterbacks, so I didn't exactly need a quarterback. It was an easy spot to trade into to go get one of those top receivers. Looks like, based on a lot of the intel, that I'd be getting Malik Neighbors at that spot. based off of, listen, when I traded into it, it was either Jaden Daniels or Malik Neighbors. Sounds like the owner in the spot ahead of me is going to go Daniels, which would slide Neighbors to me, which is great. I think that there was a consideration after I traded into that spot to go after JJ McCarthy, just based on it's the super flex league. You go out and obviously you want to go get a quarterback. I agree with you on the assessment of JJ, and like we talked about it right after he got drafted. Like, it's very unknown. He has a lot of good tools around him. We'll see what happens with Hawkinson, but the waiting game of him coming in and when is that, and them being extremely patient with him. I don't know how comfortable I feel with JJ McCarthy. I don't know how comfortable I feel about him being a potential runner, because I think that they just invested some money into Aaron Jones, and I think that they like Aaron Jones, a guy who dominated them for quite a few years. I think that they're going to roll with Sam Darnold, if I'm being honest, for at least a little bit, and let JJ sit back and learn from a guy who's been in the league for 7 years and sort of is just battling for that next contract. I think that Sam will get that opportunity to do so. But just thought it was interesting with them investing all the money in Justin Jefferson this offseason, and now on the offensive line, 2 big guys in Minnesota, and a lot of the question marks. So, we'll see what happens in a few weeks, but, we'll obviously talk about the value and the implications and all of that for some of these other guys as we start to get into redraft season. But next episode, so it's actually not going to be next week. I was almost going to say next week. In just a few days, sounds like we're going to be taping on Thursday, as we have a double week this week, and start to get into that redraft dynasty mode. Those draft recaps and preparations for redraft in the month of August. Our final division preview comes in just a few days, and it's going to be the AFC West. Patrick Mahomes is obviously the dominant story. Him and Xavier Worthy, we saw that bomb that they caught the other day. They were the first team to show up for training camp. Obviously, you got the Raiders and the big question marks. Obviously, they let go of Josh Jacobs, and Zamir White's there in the backfield. Denver goes a new direction at quarterback, gets rid of Russell Wilson. Bo Nix is there. And then it's the Chargers, who seem to get rid of everybody when they bring in Jim Harbaugh out of Michigan, and sort of kind of did a bit of a reset at the entire offensive position. What to you is the most intriguing storyline as we tease something that is just a few days away?
Yeah, Brett, I mean, I'm going to go with the Chargers because they literally just sent everybody away except for Justin Herbert, and their top 2 weapons now in Quentin Johnston and Josh Palmer. Literally everybody else is out the door. Got rid of Keenan Allen, got rid of Mike Williams, got rid of Austin Eckler. As a Herbert owner, I'm very worried in terms of dynasty. However, I'm worried about this year. I don't think I'm too worried about the future, because I think as the years go on and they really get used to a Harbaugh kind of system, that the passing game will start to thrive. But for this year, he's got Ladd McConkey and a couple more weapons, and that's pretty much it. And that makes me a little worried as a Herbert owner. Some people are selling him. He's way too young to give up on. He's way too young in super flex, Brett. Just a couple years after he was a top 3 quarterback in fantasy football. Like, you can't give up on him just yet. So I'm sticking with him. And I think it's going to be a process. I wouldn't freak out as much as some of those other Herbert owners have in this offseason.
Yeah, I'm actually intrigued by them as well. And I think that, I have Josh Palmer on my team, and I'm kind of unsure what his role is going to be. Like, he's the number 2 weapon, de facto, but also there's Quentin Johnston. They go out, they get Ladd McConkey. And so, I'm a little intrigued about the potential of trading Josh Palmer, and what the market would say about that. I think for me, though, the biggest question mark, and, it's the easy, thing to go to, but will the Kansas City Chiefs finally have a number 1 receiver? I think is the big question mark for me. They go out, they get Hollywood Brown. Rashee Rice and the big question marks that we are seeing around him this offseason. And they go out and they draft Xavier Worthy, who everybody is now comparing to Tyreek Hill because of that one catch that he had a few days ago. I don't think that he'll be Tyreek Hill, but listen, sky's the limit. But what it is. They go out and they grab McCall Hardman back, and so it's sort of they retool what they're doing there at wide receiver. Does Travis Kelce, maintain his status as a top level tight end, or does he take a step back? And then Isaiah Pacheco, what we saw out of him last year, can he continue to do that? And for me, out of all of those, I think it really comes down to Patrick Mahomes. And we saw a big step back from Patrick Mahomes in what was a down year last year. A lot of weeks where I was disappointed to have him on my team. A lot of weeks where he let me down. There was some weeks where it was the playoffs, and really we saw this stretch down the end of the season where he didn't score over 20 points. Championship week, he didn't score over 13 points. He only scored 12. And so a lot of disappointing weeks down the stretch from the fantasy community as far as Patrick Mahomes. Can he get back to that level? I think is a huge question mark, and one that's definitely going to affect my thinking as far as the redraft goes, where it seems like every year I go out and I take Patrick Mahomes with that 3rd to 4th round. I think I'm second guessing it myself this year, and I've sort of gone back and forth of, do I want to take Mahomes or do I want to take another guy? That's, to me, the biggest question. It all revolves around Kansas City.
Yeah. No disagreements there.
All right. So we will be back in just a few days. Make sure before that you subscribe to all of our other episodes and go check out a lot of our draft recaps that we did and our division previews. Subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. We shall rise yet again. For Zach Malvin, I'm Brett Malvin. This has been the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. Catch you in just a few days.